Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be talking about Marvel Contest of Champions meta changes, how they're being enforced, how they're being artificially manufactured, and what do they mean for you as a player. Now I'm making today's video sort of as a follow-up to my yesterday's video about whether you should or should not wait 3 to 6 months in order to rank up a new champion, and quite a few people asked me to elaborate my thought process over there, and so here we are. So the best way to actually try and explain this, I will go over through release champ dates and what kind of champions we basically consecutively can see come out after a god tier champion, for instance. Right, first champion, we're going to ignore everything early on in the game. There aren't that many kind of breakthrough champions over there, but 2017 basically is a rise, or the rise of your superstar champions. Right, what I mean by superstar champions, let's take a look first. Champion that's still extremely kind of like potent would be Archangel. Now, how can you determine that Archangel had been immediately or a few months later being started to phase out via nodes or with content? The first thing's simple. We can take a look at how many immune champions are in 2016. In 2016 we have She-Hulk, Kamala Khan, to a degree Red Hulk, even though you can still place neurotoxins on him, but fair enough, let's give it to him. So Red Hulk, Ghost Rider, and Hyperion. So I have 5 champions that are immune, or pseudo-immune, whatever. I counted as 4.5. Now, 2017, how many champions Archangel is not performing well up against? We have Cable, who immediately degens or does whatever to Archangel, but fair enough. I'm going to count that as a half a point too there. Then you have Dormammu, Iceman, King Groot, Nebula, Kingpin. I can shrug it all off. You have Medusa, Morningstar, Mephisto, that are all immune, and like as well as Taskmaster, I suppose, to a degree, that can become immune. But you can immediately see that increase of immunity champions as soon as Archangel kind of becomes dominant over there. And you can see that being followed up in early 2018 as well, with Gladiator, Hulk, Sentinel, Iron Man, Infinity War. Basically these champions that came out within next 6 months to a year after Archangel. There were a lot more immunity champions that, let's say, prior 6 months to a year before that. But next kind of like superstar champion that came out, the biggest, the baddest superstar contest had seen to date was Blade, right? So Blade came out in October of 2017. And when he came out, he was just simply the GOAT. He was the best for pretty much everything. Shredded Act 5, shredded AQ, shredded AW. Your only problem with Blade was that you didn't have enough blades, kind of thing. And then let's see what is going to happen within 5 months after Blade comes out. Because let's say that is exactly the time period Kabam at the moment is using to impose these changes. They need 3 months to read their data and another 3 months to act up on it. Now we're going to be using the same kind of time frame here. Let's give them 3 months of reading how badly Blade beat up everybody in the contest, and then let's give them another 2 to 3 months to act on it, and that's how we're going to look at the different champions, right? What are going to be the first things we notice 5 months later? Sabretooth comes into the contest without villain tag, with a lot of heal. Okay, I suppose you can kind of argue the villain tag argument. I still do 100% think he should be a villain. Nonetheless, you have Proxima Midnight, Corvus come in the contest not as villains, right? They're 100% villains. If it would not be for Blade in the contest, they would have been named villains. And now let's check a look what's happening 6 to 7 months after Blade has been entered in the contest. It's Iron Man, Infinity War, and Domino, the 2 champions that presented nightmare for everybody to fight up against, whether that was in AW, whether it was in quests. They were also often used as like mini bosses or some sort of boss nodes, or everywhere. Basically, those were the toughest fights in content at the time. And guess what? Blade sucks against them. Blade has absolutely nothing good going for those fights at the time, right? And exactly. So basically that took about 6 months to design flat out counters or endgame content for Blade, but here at the same time they have to keep pushing their meta. They have to provide answers. Check which champion came out 1 month, exactly 1 month before Iron Man Infinity War. Obviously it was Corvus, right? So Corvus had absolutely no problem shredding Iron Man Infinity War, get 2 missions, perfect. Domino, 2 missions, once again, do you think it's a coincidence? You can get a Wade mission, oh, it's so perfect, right, so convenient. And it's just in time, as they basically presented a roadblock for Blade, which was everybody's kind of end goal champion. They released Corvus months prior to that, just in time for everybody to get hyped about Corvus, or being able to deal with the most difficult fights in the contest of champions at the time. So you see the timeline there? You see how perfectly it lines up? They release Blade, 5-6 months later, Iron Man Infinity War, Domino, that Blades get shredded by. Then all of a sudden people have to check up and start looking for new answers to Iron Man Infinity War and Domino. And what does everybody see there? Everybody see Corvus Glaive come out month prior. But you know what? The featured Grandmaster crystals will be coming back around 2 months later, after, let's say, you face Iron Man Infinity War as well, one day, right? And that's exactly what happened in Alliance War. Everybody who didn't have Corvus are basically extremely screwed, and there are many alliances that struggled with Iron Man Infinity War, and many people struggle with Domino still. But if you had, let's say, Corvus Glaive, you had absolutely no problems dealing with Iron Man Infinity War, and therefore you got your advantage for having up-to-date roster to a degree, and that was an initial kind of key aspect, key point of metagame change in Marvel Contest of Champions. Right now, that once that has been done, immediately, let's say, Corvus has been dominating all the content, Wasps, whatever, not Ghosts, still perfect. Check what happens 4 or 5 months after Corvus is being released. Defenders such as Korg come out that do have a heavy damage mitigation, that do give Corvus immediately damage back, that wastes his Corvus Glaive charges in order to be countered, right? Then another few months later, there's Champion that works perfectly against Corvus, just because Corvus A is one of the champions of the universe, and B, he got all that extra heal on AW boss nodes, for instance, that Corvus realistically could not deal with that guy. Now when you go 7 months afterwards, you got more flat out counters, Thing, Havoc, Mr. Sinister, that absolutely have no chance against Corvus. Now as Corvus' popularity started to wane, let's say after Korg and some other champions, Ghost's popularity increased drastically, right? So Ghost came out in July 2017. Let's see what happens at January 2018. January 2019, my bad, missed the year. So we have Thing, we have Havoc, we have Mr. Sinister, who all countered Corvus, but also heavily start to counter Ghost. At the same point, another month later, you have first champion that cannot miss, that basically Ghost's phasing is made useless by, because Nick Fury cannot miss. Now the next champion after, Annihilus, that can armor break Ghost even if you try to parry, and at times you will have to, as we all know, and then basically can't phase, and that gives hard time to Ghost. Next champion, Human Torch. He's another champion that has a potential in not to miss, right? 2 months later, we have Ebony Maw, another champion that's practically unbeatable by Ghost and Corvus, like flat out direct counter to that. So we can see that we had these champions that can phase, and immediately after that we have the champions that can counter the phasing. And that is exactly what has been happening in the contest with any single champion that amasses too good of a statistic, gets a counter made for them. Same thing is gonna happen and is happening, let's say, with Void. Now Void is a champion that generically does not have too many bad matchups, right? Only kind of like bad matchups for Void are typically the champions that do shrug off all the debuffs. Is that correct, right? But now we have, let's say, Vision Arcus coming in the contest, who has a chance to shrug off all non-damaging debuffs, same as Elder Bloodstone is going to be able to do that. And also all these champion releases often come together with node design. All of these damage reductions and all these more specific nodes perfectly kind of correspond to the release of their champions, and artificially increases the need, the worth, the value, the kind of like the way people look at these champions. let's take a look at, for instance, on a node like Acid Wash, right? Acid Wash is a fairly recent node, recently made its debut in AEQ map 7. What it basically states is you deal 90% less damage unless the opponent is poisoned. Now, up until the time we first saw that node, we only had Dr. Voodoo that could reliably poison your opponents, King Groot to a degree, but who the hell is going to play King Groot in AQ map 7? And you have Ant-Man, but the same thing, who the hell is going to play Ant-Man in map 7? So realistically, you only had one champion that can bypass that node properly, which was Dr. Voodoo, right? And that node came out, first I saw it was, I don't know, half a year ago. Let's take a look at the things that have happened within the last half a year. We have had Mysterio, who can poison on his heavy attacks, reliably, easily access and counter that node. We have had Black Widow Clairvoyant, who can easily poison opponents at any given time to her will. And we are having Man-Thing come in contest next month, I believe, that will be able to poison champions on the will. And you can count on the fact that you will see Acid Wash being introduced in your regular variant or 6.3 or whatever kind of content that's gonna get pushed out will feature these nodes, will require you to have either Dr. Voodoo, like as a huge exception of the past, or one of these new champions that all of a sudden can place poison debuffs. Now the same thing has happened this year with Incinerate debuffs. We have Do You Burn node in AQ map 7, right? But all of a sudden we have Human Torch come out this year. All of a sudden we came out Black Widow Clairvoyant, who can also place Incinerate debuffs. All of a sudden we had Sunspot come out, who can place Incinerate debuffs on opponent. And is it a coincidence that we have a node that basically demands you to be able to incinerate in AQ map 7? Do you guys think it's only going to stay in AQ map 7? No, it's going to make its way to the contest. Because then what's going to happen, you're going to be doing your best to find usable, good meta champions that can also incinerate opponents. And the same thing goes for poison, right? You're not going to be able to do everything with Dr. Voodoo. You will need that Sunspot, you will need that Human Torch or Black Widow Clairvoyant in order to clear the new content. And that is extremely worrisome because these nodes are typically getting more and more specific. If in past the things that they tried to counter was huge damage or crits or something like that, now they're dwelling into smallest mechanics, smallest damage over time debuff types, so on and so forth, and that is what they're demanding you, and that is what I don't like, because it's just kind of trickling down and down and down, and you will essentially end up to a point where you will have to have one of very few champions in the game in order to deal with the content. And I think Kabam is slowly but surely kind of like spiraling down, and at some point we're going to reach a tip where it's going to be unbearable to compete in the new content unless you have every single champion available, because these nodes are getting so specific that many of them have counters that you can count on the fingers of your hand, which is not a good node design. And that is basically what I think has been happening in Marvel Contest of Champions. That is also what I think you will be able to see in the near future, because if you pay attention here, you're definitely going to see you release great bleed characters. They're releasing champions that are immune to bleed or can mitigate the bleed or can basically ignore the bleed. If you release champions that rely on being able to phase for opponent to miss, then they immediately release the champions that can counter the phasing, that basically cannot miss, and so on and so forth. And now when they're making champions that can reliably inflict poison, incinerate, or any other kind of like new type of thing, there will be nodes to follow soon within next couple of months that will demand you to have these champions. That is how they artificially generate the necessity for the latest champions in the meta. That is exactly what I meant before when I said that these champions are always the most effective within first half a year of them being released, because the content has not yet been created to counter them, and the champions haven't been created to counter them. The nodes do not kind of like really count them into an aspect. And that is also why it will be increasingly more important to have kind of like your roster options up to date, because of this more specific trickle-down node design, which will require you to have extremely specific champions. And yeah, anyway, so once again, that is my take on how meta shifts in Marvel Contest of Champions have been happening. That is also my take on exactly how Kabam is trying you to market the champions. as basically hype something up, create counter for it, meanwhile hype up a new champion, make it look amazing, and immediately start creating counters for that via other champions, via nodes, and basically that you are going to be pushed in some sort of endless loop where whatever you have gotten recently is about to get a counter to, and you will need the next new thing, the next brand new, the great thing. Now, obviously, don't get me wrong, a lot of these champions still have a lot of overlap because they can never design something that counters absolutely everything. So there will be times like we can see right now, for instance, Ebony Maw is a fairly new champion, but once again, he falls easy prey to, let's say, for Blade, just because he's a Mystic champion. Blade can shred Mystics with dangers and so on and so forth, because now that they are focusing on countering Corvus or Void or Ghost or whatever, they will not be able to counter, let's say, Blade or some other champions at the same time. So there will be definite overlap for these older champions to still be useful, but that will not change the fact that the newer champions will be absolutely necessary and demanded and basically required for you to compete. But yeah, so anyways guys, I hope I didn't bore you for too long. So this was my take on meta shifts, how they're generated, how Kabam is using meta shifts in order to profit and sell these champions just before they're making these changes, and how they are basically basing their game and marketing strategy, in my opinion. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if you do agree with me, if you don't, if you have any comments on the situation, if you have any kind of counter arguments, if you think I'm well off the ballpark, also let me know. I'm always willing to learn and listen. But yeah, that will do for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and that will, yeah, basically see you guys. Don't forget to sub.